Welcome to Thoughts on Thursday. It's Reverend Miller.
And Stuart Holmes.
We are in our suits today. A longtime member of the choir, Gene Dreisbach's funeral was today, so that's not that we wouldn't get dressed up for you, but we were dressed up for the viewing and the funeral. For our Thoughts on Thursday, we've been looking at what are not only challenges, but strengths or new ways of worship. And as we are in a new time with COVID and technology, there's just different influences on worship. And so today we continue that, and we're looking at really changes in worship practices that really go along with changes in society. And there's two things when it comes to church attendance and also on worship music. And we mentioned that a little bit last week, right?
Yeah.
The worship wars, as some people call it, with traditional classic worship, as we might call it, and contemporary. And those have aspects within our society also. One of the trends that we see, and they have written many books and studies on it, that 40 years ago, a person who said they went to church on a regular basis, that really meant about 90 to 100% attendance, that they were always here. As they survey people now, a person who says, yes, we go to worship on a regular basis, that usually means about 50% of the time. And if you're a long-standing church member, you'll have a broken heart because sports are now on Sunday. And so there's just competition for time, and that also impacts worship, because if you come in every Sunday, you would be doing different things. If you have, sometimes you can have almost a different crowd if you're talking about 50% worship attendance.
Yeah, and the sports was just one thing that's impacted on that, but that kind of opened the door. And I don't certainly want to sound anti-sport, like a poor sport, but it's impacted music as well as the worship service itself. Yeah. Children can't seem to get to prioritize church worship or choir attendance, and not only children don't prioritize it, but the parents don't prioritize it. So it makes it very difficult for even people that are choir directors that are in a larger church to be able to run a program for kids.
And so we like to think this is new to the church. But really, if you look historically and you think back before automobiles, and there was only a few churches and people were taking horse and buggy, it wasn't uncommon for people not to come to church every Sunday. And even in our history of sharing pastors, there were churches that the pastor would only be there once a month. And so we're not the only ones who have to deal with that. And one of the things we're doing here at Old Paramus is actually not doing something modern, but doing something ancient. And we use what we call the Revised Common Lectionary, which is selections of passages for each Sunday. And it's on a 3-year cycle, and then you repeat that. And I think the strength of that for our times now is that if by repeating those passages, having a 3-year cycle, if you're not here all the time, you're going to catch those passages, and it will really sink in over time. Mm-hmm. And one of the other things we did along with that is we send out email on Monday with all the lectionary passages, a few questions, and also some prayers to go along with that. So you can study and see those passages, and if by chance you're not in worship that Sunday, you're still in that cycle. And so that's just, it's not a modern way of doing things. It's using an ancient tradition to really help in a modern time. So I think that's a good practice. And then one of the challenges we face is if a Christian church had kind of a regular style of music, everyone's had an organ and hymns, you had probably more resources, and all of a sudden, starting in the 70s, probably what we call contemporary music has also become a mainstay in churches. And I I've served churches that are contemporary worship, and I personally have no problem with them. I'm not going to speak on Stuart's behalf. You might be surprised his feelings there. But that does change worship, and we probably have more people in church who can play a guitar than someone who can play an organ. At this point, we have maybe one person besides you in church.
Yeah. And a number of people that play guitar to some extent, right?
And so that has an impact on worship. And then also we see in society the idea of singing in a choir. Maybe you were forced to do that in 6th or 7th grade, but there's less training in that in life.
And going back to what you said at the beginning, the commitment for a choir member to be here is pretty significant, and people's lives are much more complicated now, and people's priorities have changed a little bit. After getting home from work, you have a TV to go to, or a computer to go to. It wasn't too long ago that those were not as prevalent in the homes. So it's been a big change.
And so for you, right, Stuart, when it comes to picking anthems or even hymns as we pick together, those are challenges you have to work around.
I try to get a good mix of different anthems, spiritual, contemporary, usually slated for next week. Transfiguration Sunday is Shine, Jesus, Shine. That's certainly in the pop culture of Christian music. The great anthems at the funeral today. I Waited for the Lord, one of Mendelssohn's finest pieces, and that is undoubtedly beautifully done musically and theologically. So it's a mix that I look for in anthems.
And that would be an interesting thing to see in the years to come, right? When it comes to worship music, there are still a lot of churches that might be contemporary on a Sunday, but on a funeral, you're going to hear more classic pieces, and we'll see if that impacts funerals in years to come.
Yeah.
And so I would say we're classic and traditional, wading into the contemporary a little bit.
Right.
Where you might see some more contemporary churches that have gone back to adding some classic. It's still a fluid movement, I think, within churches.
It's interesting. I'm as a classically trained musician, and with organ being a major emphasis in my entire career, I'm sitting here looking at trying to pick out music that will appeal to other people, whether it's on the piano or on the organ. It's a constant struggle for me, being pretty much on one side, to be able to find music that's going to hit the other end of the spectrum, the musical spectrum.
And I mean, that's a change too. It's interesting. We think in the church, the organ as a sacred instrument.
It is, isn't it?
Well, it's certainly important, but at one time it was a popular instrument, correct?
Yeah, that's true.
You would see it at a baseball game.
Yeah.
You would see it in a movie theater, not in my time, I'll tell you that one, but maybe in a baseball when I was younger. So you saw an organ in many other places than just a church, and you don't see that as much.
Primarily in the States.
Yes, in the States.
Yeah. I would agree.
So this is our last segment on that, but it's just looking at the challenges and also the strengths of our current time. And you might be wondering, what's the strength of people not being at church every Sunday? Well, if we're to reach out to the world, we have to be out in the world, so that can be a strength. We don't always have to see that as a negative, that people are out and maybe along a soccer game and talking with people and sharing God's love and grace. So I try to see the good in most things.
And this is going to be, people are going to defrock me by saying that, the church is more than just a physical building, that getting out there and being what I know as being Christian. What's that definition? How do I handle myself in today's world, which is certainly more secular in its approach to how we deal with other people?
Yeah.
If I could be so bold to say, without getting into trouble.
Well, we'll see. We
Yeah.
haven't gotten too much trouble yet.
Not yet.
Either no one's watching or
Well,
we're just not getting in trouble.
I'm looking at the end of the gangplank.
So we'll see you next week as we get into Transfiguration and then Lent, and that will be our focus in our conversation. So thanks for joining us.
I'm going to end with a Bach piece.
Ooh, perfect.
That is actually from one of his cantatas, and this piece is really taken from a violin transcription, and you can almost hear that violin going on. So as we close out, just imagine that it's a violin playing this crazy melody. Little blurb at the end. But that's our thoughts for Thursday.